Hey, y'all. As a growing family, my husband and I love game night, especially when it's Wayfair edition.
Let's do it. You gotta name as many Wayfair furniture and decor categories as you can. Ready? Go.
Sofas, bar stools, beds, ottomans, outdoor seating, bookshelves, kitchen tables, garden sheds, mid-century modern lamps.
Time. Nice. You got 9 out of a lot. Not too bad. Keep practicing by visiting wayfair.com, where you can shop every style for every home.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
This is episode 139 of That Shakespeare Life. That Shakespeare Life is now available on our very own digital app. This app works on your tablet, phone, or TV and lets you explore the history of William Shakespeare with exclusive content, interviews, and documentaries not available anywhere else. You can cook, dance, and play your way through the life of William Shakespeare, all without any commercials. Find out more at cassidycash.com/experience and stay tuned after the episode for even more details.
Hi, I'm James Lowland, the director of the Shakespeare at Wyandotte program at the University of Texas. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
At the beginning of A Comedy of Errors, when Lucentio shows up in Padua to study, he brings with him, of course, his servant, Tranio, to help him out. And each of the young men at Gray's Inn would have done similarly. Of course, we know that during the Christmas time, this part of the tradition of the Lord of Misrule involves masters and servants switching roles. And what do we have in Comedy of Errors? Not one, but 2 sets of masters and servants, which would interact with this tradition of masters and servants playing tricks on each other.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In 16th century England, Christmas time was a season of disorder, with many of the holiday celebrations centered around the idea of misrule, role reversal, and a celebration of general chaos as part of the Christmas festivities, which makes it surprising that the one place you would expect to find extreme order, the Inns of Court, which were essentially law school for England's budding lawyers, was also the establishment where Shakespeare staged a performance of Comedy of Errors on December 28, 1594. This Christmas performance was so riotous that members of the audience would refer to that night as the Night of Errors, setting up a subsequent mock trial for the law students to sort out who was the culprit behind the holiday disorder in the court. Here to help us explore the wild and out-of-order nature of Shakespeare's 1594 performance of Comedy of Errors and explain why it seems Gray's Inn in particular was such a hotspot for budding law students to quench their thirst for theater is our guest, Dr. Joe Stephenson. Joseph F. Stephenson is the James W. Culp Distinguished Professor of English at Abilene Christian University in Texas. He earned his PhD in 2007 from the University of Connecticut, where his dissertation focused on the intersections of Anglo-Dutch geopolitics and early modern drama. In addition to teaching courses in Shakespeare and early modern drama, both in Texas and at his university study abroad program in Oxford, Joe enjoys reviewing for journals like Shakespeare and Shakespeare Bulletin, as well as the website Reviewing Shakespeare. In 2017, Joe was privileged to notice a play called The Dutch Lady deep in the archives of the Boston, Massachusetts Public Library. He has published several articles on the play since then and is working on a scholarly edition of this play. Hello, Joe. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cassidy. Great to be here.
Shakespeare is thought to have performed Comedy of Errors at Gray's Inn Hall on December 28, 1594, which is right at the beginning of the records we have for Shakespeare's performances in London at all. Joe, does this performance record suggest Shakespeare was pretty well established by Christmas of 1594 since Gray's Inn was such a prominent place? I mean, would they have invited an upstart crow, for example, to perform there?
Well, evidently, yes. Your question refers to Robert Greene's characterization of Shakespeare as an upstart crow in 1592. And I think that a mere 2 years later, Shakespeare was still, in some ways, very much an upstart crow. And I don't mean that in a bad way, like Robert Greene meant, but Shakespeare was still finding his footing, still breaking norms. He was by no means the preeminent dramatist of England in 1594. That title would probably have been shared by Marlowe and Kidd. And the Comedy of Errors was not Shakespeare's crowning achievement. It's basically a translation, adaptation of the Menaichme by Plautus. But even that early in his career, Shakespeare showed an extraordinary talent for adapting sources well. He added the frame story of the father Aegeon seeking his two sons, which gives the play a lot of its emotional appeal, as well as the character of Luciana, the sister-in-law, which gives the play some sexual tension and realism. And most especially, Shakespeare adds the two Dromios, who increase the amount of confusion and, errors in the play exponentially. You're right that Gray's Inn was a prominent place. It was a very good gig for Shakespeare's company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, which was newly created by Elizabeth in the year 1594. But we also have records that the Chamberlain's Men performed twice before Queen Elizabeth at Greenwich Palace that Christmas season. So Gray's Inn was not the most prestigious venue they performed in that season. By the way, they performed two comedies in front of Elizabeth. One of them may very well have been Comedy of Errors. The other one could have been The Taming of the Shrew, which was written by that time as well.
Charles Whitworth, in his 2002 Introduction to Comedy of Errors, writes that the December performance of Shakespeare's play was done before such a riotous assembly and in such disorder that the event actually got its own moniker, and it became known as the Night of Errors. The students would set up a mock trial to arraign the culprit. Was this riotous assembly, as he calls it, part of the traditionally out-of-order Christmas festivities, or was there something particular about Shakespeare's play that caused such a disruption?
Well, good question. Then as now, part of the Christmas season just involves a lot of festive cheer, frankly, a lot of drinking. And I don't know that we should blame Shakespeare for whatever disorder occurred on that fateful night of December 28th, 1594. In fact, December 28th, as the fourth day of Christmas, actually has some somber associations. It's traditionally known as the Feast of the Holy Innocents, memorializing the infants who were killed by King Herod when he was trying to get rid of the infant Jesus, according to the Gospel of Matthew. Now, if, and we don't really know, but if Shakespeare originally wrote the Comedy of Errors for that December 28th occasion, then that connects to his inclusion of Aegeon and Amelia, the two older parents in the play. They thought their children were surely dead, but almost miraculously, the parents are able to be reunited with their children at the end of the play.
How did a playwright get the chance to stage a production here at the Inns of Court? Not just Shakespeare, but anyone. Did they have to be invited by someone in particular?
Great question again. Each of the Inns of Court, or at least some of them from my research, would have employed a master of the revels, just as Queen Elizabeth did for the kingdom, and just as Theseus does in A Midsummer Night's Dream. That man, the master of the revels, would have been responsible for booking and arranging the entertainments year-round. But Christmas would have been an especially busy season. The records at Gray's Inn, which I've looked at in conjunction with my recent research, show huge amounts of candles being bought around Christmas time. Now, these candles may have been used for studying, for example. I mean, these are law students living there, right? So presumably they did study sometimes. They might have been used for Christmas decorations, but they certainly would have been used during any performances. As anyone who has gone to the Sam Wanamaker Playhouse at the Globe knows, it takes a lot of candles to illuminate an indoor theater.
One of Shakespeare's most notable patrons, the Earl of Southampton, was a member at Gray's Inn. Do you think that patronage is why Shakespeare performed a play there?
That's a very intriguing suggestion. We can't really say, but, why not? Shakespeare is, of course, connected to Henry Wriothesley, Earl of Southampton, in 1593 when he dedicated Venus and Adonis to him, and then in 1594, the year we're talking about, when Shakespeare dedicated The Rape of Lucrece to him. As you know, many people identify Southampton as the fair youth in the sonnets, who in the first 17 sonnets is encouraged to marry and reproduce. However, interestingly, in November 1594, just a month before the performance we're discussing, we have a report that Southampton had refused to marry the woman his parents had picked out for him, and he had to pay her family £5,000 for breaking off the intended marriage. So, if Southampton certainly was part of Shakespeare's circle at the time, certainly his patron, why wouldn't he try to get his friend's company a profitable gig at Gray's Inn? And if, more speculatively, he really was the fair youth of the sonnets, he might have been inclined to schedule an event where he could see Shakespeare perform and spend more time with him, especially now that he had that engagement broken off.
Gray's Inn had, since 1539, had the Carthusian monastery as its landlord, but transferred its ownership to the crown after the dissolution of the monasteries. Under Elizabeth I's patronage, Gray's Inn flourished and really saw its most prominent period during her reign. Joe, what did Elizabeth do to grow the reputation and success of Gray's Inn, and why was that important to her? Did Shakespeare's performances play a role in this plan?
Well, broadly speaking, during her reign, Elizabeth nurtured both culture and learning, including legal study at the inns. The inns were sometimes known as the Third University of England, with Oxford and Cambridge, of course, being the other two. However, Elizabeth would not have been interested in the plays at Gray's Inn, since when she wanted a play, she called the company to one of her royal palaces, Greenwich or Whitehall, usually. I think the growth of the Inns of Court during Elizabeth's long reign is probably more a product of the time than of any particular influence of Elizabeth. There's an old rhyme. I can't find any particular source for it. Apparently, it's just been passed down through the centuries, and it goes like this. Gray's Inn for walks, Lincoln's for your call, the inner for a garden, and the middle for its hall. So that would imply that maybe the Middle Temple was the best place to see a play if it had the most beautiful hall. And indeed, many plays were performed at Middle Temple, while Gray's Inn was famous for its walks. Gray's Inn for walks. These walks were indeed built up beautifully during Elizabeth's reign, and there is a little bit of a connection to Elizabeth there. Legend has it that some of the catalpa trees on the grounds at Gray's Inn were grown from seeds brought back by Elizabeth's favorite, Sir Walter Raleigh. And in the larger culture of London, outside of theater going, certainly the beautiful walks on the grounds of Gray's Inn remained famous for many years. During the Restoration, people who wanted to see and be seen, especially if they were wealthy, of social rank, they would go to Gray's Inn to walk around and show off their new clothes, to show off, their person, rather than one of the public parks. By the way, that same rhyme mentions the garden of the inner temple, right? Inner for a garden. And that garden is where Shakespeare sets the famous garden scene of Henry VI, Part 1. That's the garden of the inner temple.
I believe holiday celebrations at Gray's Inn typically included a masque, for which these law students were particularly well known, having their own company that even performed before Queen Elizabeth herself. With such a focus on masks and the established tradition of writing their own play, Joe, why do you think that they wanted to have Shakespeare perform Comedy of Errors instead of doing their own production that year?
Well, we don't know that they did not do their own production of a masque that year. The records we have of performances are very incomplete and somewhat haphazard. Just because a particular performance is not recorded does not mean it didn't happen. To state it more directly, there were surely many performances that we don't know about. Indeed, there were many plays, many masques, many entertainments that we have a mention of here or there, but the texts have been lost. Three great scholars, Roz Knudsen, David McInnes, and Matthew Stegel, run a collection website called Lost Plays Database, which puts together as much as we know about some of these titles. To go back to your original question, I don't see any reason why the students at Gray's Inn shouldn't have done a masque in 1594, but we just don't have information about it.
Was Comedy of Errors supposed to be staged as a masque?
No, Comedy of Errors does not contain the elements we associate with masks. There are no references to music, dance, and a masque needs to have a sort of a stately tone that celebrates perfect order. Now that I think about it, I suppose the Comedy of Errors could be set up as a sort of anti-masque, Anti-mask does not mean against the mask, but rather before the mask. In the anti-mask, a disorder is presented, and then the mask that follows would correct the disorder by presenting order. So perhaps after the Comedy of Errors, either on the same night or maybe even the following night, the students could have presented a mask that would correct the errors and disorder of Comedy of Errors and reaffirm, the fact that order is present. Again, we have no record of it, but it might have worked.
According to tradition, at Christmas, the students of the inn ruled the inn for a day, adopting a Lord of Misrule called the Prince of Purple. I know that the idea of appointing a Lord of Misrule is a broad tradition in England, not just applying to these law students. But is this celebration of chaos one of the reasons Shakespeare thought Comedy of Errors would be appropriate in that location specifically?
Sure. Not so much as to the location, but as to the tradition of the Lord of Misrule. The tradition of Misrule, and broadly speaking, this would be what Bakhtin references as carnival, is appropriate to the traditional Christmas festivities that would have been going on in 1594. Some of the traditions involve masters and servants switching roles. Now, each of the young gentlemen, or most of the young gentlemen, let's say, at Gray's Inn, would have had a manservant accompany them to Gray's Inn with them. A young gentleman wouldn't be expected to simply show up on his own with no one to take care of him at Gray's Inn. We have a similar situation at the beginning of A Comedy of Errors. When Lucentio shows up in Padua to study, he brings with him, of course, his servant, Tranio, to help him out. And each of the young men at Gray's Inn would have done similarly. Of course, we know that during the Christmas time, this part of the tradition of the Lord of Misrule involves masters and servants switching roles. And what do we have in Comedy of Errors? Not one, but two sets of masters and servants, which would interact with this tradition of masters and servants playing tricks on each other.
Did Shakespeare go back and perform a play at the Inns of Court again, or was this just a one-time thing?
Oh, no, he performed again. There is one other play that we know Shakespeare's company performed at one of the Inns of Court, Twelfth Night at Middle Temple in 1602. That play's first recorded performance, and very possibly first performance ever, was February 2nd, Candlemas of 1602. So if Twelfth Night is the end of Christmas properly understood, Candlemas, February 2nd, was the utmost limit of Christmassy celebrations. Many people back then, and even some today, would leave up their decorations until Candlemas. As the name suggests, the celebration involves a lot of candles. This idea goes back to Luke chapter 2, when Jesus is presented in the temple and hailed as a light to the Gentiles.
You mentioned earlier that Elizabeth wouldn't have been particularly invested personally in the performances that happened at Gray's Inn because she could call up performances before her palaces and courtiers whenever she liked. And so whatever she wanted to see, she just had them perform it there. And I wonder if that situation applies to the law students as well, particularly in terms of why did they have Shakespeare come to the Inns at Court to do a play when they could have just gone to the Globe to see a performance?
Well, the law students were famously loyal and frequent playgoers. We have records of many plays being performed at the inns themselves, as you said, not just the two Shakespeare plays already discussed, but many others. And though the students certainly did go to the Globe to see plays, they were more associated with the indoor theaters like the Blackfriars, which Shakespeare's company reacquired the rights to in 1608. John Marston, one of Shakespeare's contemporaries, was himself a member of the Middle Temple, and he wrote a lot of plays that seemed to cater to the educated, wealthy young men of the Inns of Court. For example, John Marston's play, The Dutch Courtesan, performed by the children of the Queen's Revels at the Blackfriars in 1604, contains quite a bit of legal language. In Act 1, there's a rather famous speech, which is a sort of a mock legal defense of prostitution as a profession by the character Freeville. And Freeville ends that famous speech with the lawyer's phrase, "Give me my fee." So he gives this, imagined legal defense of the practice of prostitution and ends by saying, give me my fee. And we can imagine that the many young lawyers who would have been in the audience there at the Blackfriars found that particularly hilarious. So yes, they could occasionally command a performance at the Inns of Court. That would have been, pretty expensive, though. Maybe they just saved that sort of thing for special times, but that didn't prevent them from going to other plays later. The indoor theaters were more associated with an educated, wealthy audience. As you know, the Globe, you could get in for a penny if you were willing to stand in the yard as a groundling. The most expensive seat at the Globe was sixpence in the Lord's rooms above the stage. At Blackfriars, the least expensive seat was sixpence. And so it's a smaller crowd. The plays have a lot more wordplay, less swordplay. They tend to have more Latin phrases. And once again, they mention the Greek myths a bit more, etc. So it's a lot of things that would appeal to any educated audience, but many of them specifically are written to appeal to the students of the Inns of Court.
Joe, this is a fascinating topic, and I know we would love to learn more about it. What are some of your favorite books or resources you can recommend that we use to learn more?
Well, starting where we just left off with John Marston, way back in 1969, Philip Finkelpearl wrote a book called John Marston of the Middle Temple. And that book remains very useful to this day. It was perhaps the first serious work that really dug into these connections between the drama and the Inns of Court, particularly with Marston's work, but he also covers the Inns of Court generally. A much more recent work about the Inns of Court is called The Intellectual and Cultural World of the Early Modern Inns of Court. And that's written by three scholars, Jane Elizabeth Archer, Elizabeth Goldring, and Sarah Knight. That's from only 7 years ago, and it's quite good. Focusing on a little bit later time period, Julie Sanders wrote about various locations and their connections to drama in a book called The Cultural Geography of Early Modern Drama, 1620 to 1650. I'll also mention that the Lost Plays database that I've already referred to contains plenty of references to entertainments at the Inns of Court. That's lostplays.folger.edu, a really great resource. And for anyone who's interested in this period at all, but it certainly is relevant to the Inns of Court, I want to mention one of the great scholarly achievements of our time, Martin Wigan's work, British Drama, a Catalogue, 1533 to 1642. That massive work, it's in 8 or 9 volumes, is a great starting place for any serious student of English drama. It contains everything we know about each play of the time. The plays, the masks, the entertainments, including the location. So Martin mentions for each play if it was performed at one of the Inns of Court and whatever else is known about the play.
Those are excellent resources. Thank you so much. We'll link to every one of these in the show notes for today's episode. Now, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
Well, right now, I think I'm obliged to say that I would take the play I'm working on. It would help me to focus and finish the edition. The play I'm working on right now is The Dutch Lady. It's a never published play in manuscript that turned up at the Boston Public Library when J. Muscella started organizing and recatalyzing all their rare books. I've been working with the manuscript since 2017, and I've already published several articles about it. Most recently, Darren Freebury Jones and I have co-authored an article for American Notes and Queries, establishing firmly that Aphra Behn used The Dutch Lady as a source for 2 of her own plays, The Roundheads and The City Heiress. I've been searching ever since I noticed the play in 2017 on finding the author, and last year I announced that I've come to the conclusion that Edward Ravenscroft wrote The Dutch Lady. That makes sense. Ravenscroft was a friend of Aphra Behn. Aphra Behn, as we know, was the first woman to make a living with her writing in England. So Ravenscroft could have passed the manuscript on to her to use as a source. Behn and Ravenscroft were among a cadre of poets and playwrights, also including Thomas Otway and John Wilmot, Earl of Rochester, who were associated with the court and the 2 patent theater companies of the 1660s and 1670s. So very soon, I hope to have finished the edition and have signed a contract with a publisher.
That all sounds very exciting. Joe Stephenson, thank you so much for being here and for talking with us about Gray's Inn and the Inns at Court. This has been a fun conversation.
Well, thanks, Cassidy. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today, and I'd just like to wish everyone listening a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for 2021.
Oh, thank you so much. Merry Christmas, Joe. To join in on this conversation with your thoughts about Gray's Inn, Comedy of Errors, and the Christmas of Misrule celebrations, be sure to check out today's show notes. Not only will you find a place to leave your comments, but there's extra history and links to the resources Joe mentions for when you want to explore deeper into the history of Christmas and Comedy of Errors and Gray's Inn. You can find all the good stuff at CassidyCash.com/episode 139. That's CassidyCash.com/EP139. How would you like to see the video of this week's interview? You can watch this interview as well as other exclusive interviews not available anywhere else right inside That Shakespeare Life app. That's right! That Shakespeare Life is now streaming on our very own digital app. We are very excited to make this available, and not only can you stream podcast episodes anywhere you go, but the app contains exclusive content like activities, games, documentary shorts, expert interviews, and animated plays, all free from ads and available anywhere you might be. You can learn Shakespeare's history from the experts who know him best while you're in the carpool line, cooking dinner, or even while you're working out. Take Shakespeare history with you wherever you go, all without any commercials. Download the app now at CassidyCash.com/experience. That's CassidyCash.com/experience. From all of us here at That Shakespeare Life, Merry Christmas! I hope you enjoy the holiday season all the way through till Candlemas. That's it for this week. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.